Okay, so hopefully you can see a screen coming up over there. Yes, agree. Something about labs.
Yeah, I can see
Yeah,
it.
okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And I was sure you were going to use this analogy.
Yeah, exactly. This is such a cool one, actually. So when, um, I suppose, like for maybe the last 20 years, we've often said to each other that, like, at Synthesis, what we're really good at is this diving out the back of a plane with no parachute, and then figuring out how to make a parachute on the way down. And I think it's like a great analogy, actually. I think that it really does embody what synthesis is all about, or certainly my perspective of synthesis. I'm always keen on exploring these areas which are pretty uncomfortable. Like they're an uncomfortable and strange, unknown place to go with customers. And I think they can be high stress, 100%, but it can also be like huge opportunities for learning. And so I do love this analogy. And I think I've put like a many victims list on the right there, because I think we've got many examples of projects where we've done exactly this. Mike talked earlier about our crypto stuff in 2007 or something like that, where we pretended for a few months that we knew what we were doing in the cryptography domain, and very quickly over weekends and lots of studying and like things like Wikipedia weren't all that popular back then, but learning about cryptography in the context of banking and credit cards was something we just picked up very quickly, and actually started building solutions in that space because there was a need, at one of the banks, and we were very keen to explore that space, and so we did it. It was like a just-in-time learning experience. And there's many more. Some of the birth of our stuff we were doing with AWS was in 2013. We were building things around containers, and we were saying, yes, this Docker thing. And actually, previous to Docker, there was something called LXC. LXC, Linux extensions for containers, is like a very interesting thing, and it allows you to create these like virtual machine type of things without there really being a virtualization layer. It's very interesting how you can start to segregate applications from each other and this in 2013 was like, it's very interesting domain. No one was really on top of it, right? But we were exploring it, and we were saying maybe we could build a product. And we even myself and Daryl and a couple of other guys started talking about this thing that we were going to build called Synthesis Metropolis, and I think it was even renamed Synthesis Gotham at some point. And it really was like the beginning of like a container orchestration type of thing. I think around 2016 we discovered something called Kubernetes and went, oh yeah, Kubernetes is probably better than what we're trying to build. But it's like we were kind of aware of the idea, quite early. And so when something like Kubernetes or DCOS or Deis in those days started to appear, we were able to understand them because we were like trying to understand we understood the underlying idea of those things. And so yeah, so I think from a synthesis technical culture perspective, I really like to think of things in this way, and not to be too afraid of getting into that unknown. So being pretty confident in your ability to learn quickly to solve problems, sort of like in front of a customer or in front of in directly into a project. I think it's quite an interesting skill, and it's something you will get better at over time, I suppose. So when I think about your choices, then as an individual, you come to this crossroad where you go like, okay, so we've got hard things and easy things. Which ones should we go after? And easy things seem easy because they're easy, right? But kind of the problem is then you're making this choice of saying, I want to go into a saturated market, because easy things are easy to compete with. People can very quickly get into an easy domain, if that makes sense. And so when we think about technology choices and technology future strategy things, I'm always trying to say, like, is this thing difficult enough for us? Actually, I don't want it to be easy enough for us. It needs to be difficult enough for us, because if it's difficult for us, it's going to be difficult for everybody. It's going to be difficult for our customers, our competitors, other people. And it means that we've got this opportunity to define something in that space. And so for me, this is an interesting thing. And my internal model is try to figure out what are those hard future things, as well as what are those high demand future things. And if you can predict those two things, then you have a business, right? Because you can start today building skills to understand those things, and you know with certainty that there will be future demand for it. So brilliant. I mean, that's like basic economics, right? But not to say what are the easy things we can pick up today that will be in demand in the future, because then you're going to have a hard time into the future, right? And things like price become the differentiator as opposed to your skill or your capability. So actually, my presentation is all about just showing pictures that I drew and different models of how I think I see the world, and I think how synthesis sees the world from a technology strategy perspective. So I'm very inspired by this curve. It's like, I'm sure everyone's seen this thing. It's called the technology adoption curve, and it totally makes sense. You can see this in real life. You've experienced this. So you have this, technology starts. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. You probably can't. But things start on the left. Like a new technology appears, right? Maybe it's LXC containers, or maybe it's streaming, or it's machine learning, or something like that, right? Think of anything. It starts out definitely with these innovators, and the demand for it is very low. So I suppose the kind of y-axis, is that the y-axis? The x-axis? No, the y-axis. The y-axis is demand, and I suppose the x-axis is time. So there's very low demand for machine learning when it was a university kind of thing, and it was like nobody really knew how to apply it, but there were innovators in that space who were pushing it forward. Initially, you then move, once it becomes kind of usable, you move into this like early adopter phase where people are starting, well, like where people who are okay to use broken technology and broken ideas are starting to explore it and go like, oh yeah, this containers thing or this machine learning thing, it's like, it's pretty interesting. It's not exactly like perfect, but it's like we can start to pick it up, and we're okay to forgive it where it maybe isn't perfect, like it's probably not ready or like my dad, to use, or probably he would be okay with it, but for like the general public, right, to use this thing because it's a bit broken and a bit scrappy, and so it's not ready for the majority of people yet, but there will be a bunch of early adopters that are starting to pick it up. And then there's this interesting conversion. You get this double line thing here called crossing the chasm, which is where as technology becomes more and more adopted, you then move into the early and late majority. And this is really where the commercial stuff makes sense. So you can't really make money in the innovators and early adopters side of this graph because there's very low demand. So there's not a lot of people wanting to pay for it. But once it hits majority and you cross that chasm, that's where the cash is. But interestingly, when I think of this curve, though, it's to say, yes, of course, we want to get into that early and late majority. We're a commercial company. We have to pay salaries, and like we want to be successful. And of course, that fundamentally means we've got to make money somehow, right? And so we can just go out there and identify things that are already in the early and late majority, but you're already at a disadvantage because you didn't take that technology up the curve with you. And so you're going into a highly competitive space. So the idea of this curve, from my perspective, is to say we have to identify those things early on in the innovator, early adopter space, because we need to build capabilities. So by the time we cross the chasm, we've got the ability to like realize the value at that level. Does that, if that makes sense? Another framework I really dig is this thing called the Cynefin framework. It's I think it's like a Irish, or what is that language? A Celtic word, Cynefin, spelt with a C. I don't know. And it breaks the world down into like 4 different characteristics of problems, effectively. So you've got simple problems, which are like the well understood ones, which is like I don't even know what simple problems are. They're like very simple. It's like the light. I need the light on, so I press the button, the light switch. It's like so direct. There's a direct connectivity to, like, I'm driving and there's a corner in the road. What do? I turn. It's like simple. It's like the road turns, so I must turn the car. It's like 1-to-1. It's like obvious how simple it is. Complicated is where things are becoming a little bit. So maybe there's a little bit of a little bit of skill required. Like I need to tie my shoelace. Like that's a complicated thing. But like once you learn it, it's okay, and it's still very direct. There's like one way to tie a shoelace. Maybe there's 2 or 3 ways to tie a shoelace, and that's it. It's not like every time you tie your shoelace you have to go like, oh my god, like what's the scenario? Have I got a sock on or not? I'm going to tie it in a different way. No, it's like there's good practice for tying shoelaces, but it's a bit more complicated and it's less direct. Maybe the tightness of the lasers. I don't know. I'm trying to make up. There's more parameters, I suppose, in it. Then you have complex and chaotic, and so the problems on the right side are like actually not good problems for us, because these are the easy ones. Like anyone can read a document and just figure out how to tie a shoelace. Nobody needs to be consulted on for these two ranges of problems. They're too simple. It's like you can Google these things, man, and like you can't build a business on something that someone can Google, and figure it out. It's like it's very simple. And so our business really sits on this left side of the Cynefin framework, which is complex problems and chaotic problems. And complex problems are those ones where it's like multivariate. So it's like you have a lot of experience, and although you can't directly connect the solution to the problem like in a straight line, it may be connected through multiple layers, if that makes sense. So complex problems are the ones that are probably the most common at Synthesis. So it's like we've got good experience with building a cloud landing zone, but it's a very highly complicated thing because it pulls on a whole lot of different dimensions and requirements within the business. And so you bring a lot of experience into it, and every landing zone might be slightly different, so it's an emergent kind of idea. You kind of do stuff, and then you see what happens, and then you do the next thing and you see what happens. And so there's this feedback loop in complexity generally. Then you've got chaotic, which is very exciting. And chaotic for me is where nobody knows how the hell to solve this thing. It's the first time anyone's creating a landing zone. Nobody has a clue. And so the response to chaotic problems is you have to act. Instead of you doing a little thing and then seeing what the result is and then adapting, in the chaotic world, you have to build something. You have to actually solve the problem completely, and then test it with, yeah. Sorry, am I out of time already?
We've finished. You got 2 minutes, and then
yeah, that's fine.
We'll just take some of the break. We'll only have a 5-minute break instead of 15.
Fine. I'm almost done. I've got cool. two slides. So chaotic is more the acting. So it's like we're building something for the first time in the world, right? And this could be potentially more in the emergent technology space. So chaotic and complex are the like my message for this is like go after complex and chaotic. This is where the Synthesis business sits. And this is why we have hired super smart, super capable, super dynamic, super agile individuals into our team, because we're looking at, we're wanting to solve these problems. A lot of software and a lot of software companies out there probably solve problems more in the complicated and complex domain. For us, it's like complex and chaotic actually are our sweet spot. And so I think our unique value proposition sits in that domain. So here's a diagram of where I've mapped the two. So I take the technology adoption curve, which we all kind of understand, and the Cynefin framework, and map them down actually to each other. So you can see in that early adopters phase, actually acting is the right response, because nobody knows what this thing's going to do or how to solve these problems. So you have to act and attempt to solve these problems. And so it's acting when you're in the innovation phase, probing in the early adopter phase, embedding and optimizing in the early and late majority. And we can map this down to what we're doing inside Synthesis, almost like at a divisional level, like our cloud area is probably on this border of probing and embedding. We're crossing the chasm with cloud. We're getting really good at it, and we're starting to embed the ideas that we have into the domain, and it's good. It's like there's a good huge market there for us to go after. Probably in our machine learning data analytics, we're probably more in the early adopter phase. We're still figuring out like where does this stuff apply well, but we're not so early that we're figuring out like what is machine learning. Like we know that it's trying to apply it to a domain, and so you can kind of map these things onto this curve. And so economically. Yes, one more minute. Just to summarize, here's my summary slide. At a Synthesis level, this is how we see it. We say, let's invest in these early two phases and then exploit on our late two phases. And the exploitation phase is probably the most important phase, and it's the one we probably give the most focus, because that's the one that has commercial opportunity, but it's not at the cost of the investment phase up front, if that makes sense. And that's me. Any questions?
Thanks, Tom.